When a buyer makes an offer on a home, they may include earnest money to show they are serious. It is not the same as a down payment, and it is not automatically lost. Earnest money is a deposit tied to the contract rules. Earnest money is usually held by a neutral party such as an escrow company, title company, brokerage, or attorney, depending on local practice. The money sits there while the transaction moves toward closing. The deposit gives the seller confidence. If the seller accepts the offer, they may take the home off the market or stop considering other buyers. Earnest money helps show the buyer has something at stake. The amount can vary by market, price, competition, and negotiation. In a hot market, buyers may offer more earnest money to look stronger. In a slower market, the amount may be smaller. The important part is understanding the risk. Earnest money usually applies toward the buyer's costs at closing if the deal completes. It may be credited toward down payment, closing costs, or cash needed to close. The money is not an extra fee when the purchase finishes normally. The risk depends on the contract. If the buyer cancels for a reason protected by a contingency, they may get the deposit back. If they default without protection, the seller may have a claim to the money. This is why the contract language matters more than a casual conversation. A buyer may believe the deposit is safe, but the written deadlines and cancellation rights decide what happens when the deal breaks down. An inspection contingency can protect earnest money if serious issues appear and the buyer follows the contract rules. The buyer may need to give notice within a specific deadline. The deadline matters as much as the problem. The inspection example shows why the deposit and the deadline belong together. A buyer who discovers a major defect but misses the response window may have a much weaker position than a buyer who acts within the written timeline. A financing contingency can also matter. If the buyer cannot get the loan under the contract terms, the deposit may be protected if the buyer followed the financing process properly. Simply changing your mind is different from failing a protected loan condition. Financing protection also depends on effort. A buyer who ignores lender requests may not be treated the same as a buyer who cooperates fully and still cannot obtain the loan. An appraisal contingency protects the buyer when the property appraises below the agreed price, depending on the contract. Without that protection, the buyer may need to bring extra cash, renegotiate, or risk the deposit if they cannot close. One mistake is assuming earnest money is always refundable. It is not. Refundability depends on the contract, deadlines, contingencies, notices, and the reason the deal ends. Another mistake is assuming earnest money is always lost if the deal fails. That is also wrong. Buyers can often recover it when they cancel within a valid contingency or when the seller fails to perform. The two myths create opposite dangers. Thinking the deposit is always refundable can make a buyer careless. Thinking it is always lost can make a buyer afraid to use protections the contract actually gives them. Disputes can happen when buyer and seller disagree about who is entitled to the deposit. The neutral holder may not release funds until both sides agree or a legal process decides. This can delay the money even when one side feels obviously right. Deposit disputes are stressful because both sides may feel morally right. The seller feels they lost market time. The buyer feels they never received the house. The contract is what turns those feelings into a result. The seller may see earnest money as compensation for lost time if the buyer walks away improperly. The buyer may see it as their money because they never received the house. The contract decides how those competing views are handled. A larger deposit can make an offer stronger but also increases risk. Buyers should not offer more earnest money than they are prepared to have tied up or potentially dispute if something goes wrong. A larger deposit should be a strategy, not a reflex. It can strengthen an offer, but it also increases the amount that may be tied up during a dispute. Strength and risk rise together. The buyer should know exactly where the money is held. Sending funds to the wrong place can create fraud risk. Wire instructions should be verified carefully through trusted channels before money moves. Wire fraud risk is not theoretical in real estate. The amounts are large, the timing is stressful, and buyers expect instructions to arrive by email. Verifying independently is a simple step that can protect serious money. Earnest money timing matters too. The contract may require deposit delivery within a certain number of days after acceptance. Missing that deadline can create default risk or weaken the buyer's position. For sellers, earnest money is not the only sign of a strong buyer. Financing strength, contingencies, closing timeline, inspection terms, and buyer reliability all matter. A large deposit with weak financing may still be risky. For buyers, the safest habit is to read the deposit section before signing. Know the amount, due date, holder, refund rules, contingency deadlines, and dispute process. Those details matter most when the deal becomes stressful. The deposit section should be read slowly because it controls real money before the buyer owns anything. That is a different kind of risk from choosing paint colors or planning furniture. Earnest money is best understood as serious money, not casual money. It supports the offer, but it also creates consequences. Used carefully, it helps a deal move forward. Used carelessly, it can become an expensive lesson. The goal is simple. Never send earnest money unless you understand what protects it and what puts it at risk. A strong offer should still be a clear offer, not a blind gamble. Earnest money can also influence seller psychology. Two offers may have the same price, but the one with a stronger deposit may look more committed. That does not guarantee the buyer is stronger, but it can affect how the seller compares risk. Seller psychology matters, but it should not push buyers into reckless deposits. Looking serious is useful only if the buyer still understands the conditions that protect the money. The deposit becomes dangerous when buyers treat contingencies casually. A buyer may believe they can always walk away, but the contract may say otherwise after certain deadlines pass. Protection is usually tied to procedure, not just feelings. Fraud risk deserves special attention. Because earnest money moves early, scammers may send fake wiring instructions. Buyers should verify instructions using trusted phone numbers, not links or numbers from a suspicious email. The cleanest approach is to know the deposit story before making the offer. Amount, due date, holder, refund rights, dispute process, and deadlines. If any part is unclear, the buyer should ask before money leaves their account. A careful buyer treats earnest money as part of the offer strategy. The deposit should make the offer credible without turning the buyer's safety net into a careless gamble.